He laughed. 4 words. That's all it took to crush what remained of my dignity. You're nothing here. I'd spent 3 years writing the logic this company breathed on. But to the CEO's nephew, a man who'd never debugged a single line of code, I was vapor. They thought I'd cry in silence, pack my desk, disappear. But I don't need to scream. Don't need to destroy. I just need to let him shoot himself in the foot. With the very system I built. My name is Emma Grant, and until 2 weeks ago, I believed 7 years of dedication meant something at Varen Systems. Senior engineer, architect of their core systems, the one they called at 3 in the morning when production crashed. But none of that mattered when Kyle Donovan walked into that conference room. The quarterly review meeting, 40 people packed into conference room C, the one with the broken AC that made everyone sweat through their dress shirts by noon. I'd just finished presenting the Logic Nexus implementation, my baby, the algorithm that would streamline our entire ERP system for the ironclad pharma contract, $57 million riding on code I'd written between midnight coffees and weekend sprints. Kyle stood up when I finished. 26 years old, 4 months in the company, designer sneakers that cost more than my monthly car payment. His uncle, our CEO, had created a position just for him, vice president of systems architecture, the same systems he couldn't explain if his trust fund depended on it. Interesting presentation, he said, that practiced smile spreading across his face like oil on water. But I think we need to realign our talent resources. Some people here are contributing at a strategic level. He paused, his eyes finding mine across the room. And some, well, Emma's nothing here. The room went silent, not the comfortable quiet of focus, but the suffocating stillness of 40 people simultaneously forgetting how to breathe. My hands stayed steady on my laptop keyboard, though every nerve in my body screamed to slam it shut, to stand up, to ask him exactly what strategic value he'd added besides sharing DNA with the CEO. The bonus allocations reflect this, Kyle continued, pulling up his spreadsheet. Performance-based compensation is critical for motivation. My name appeared on the screen. $1,200, below mine, his friend Marcus, who'd joined a month ago and spent most of his time on LinkedIn. 20,000. The numbers blurred as blood rushed to my ears, but I kept my face neutral. 7 years of building their infrastructure, of being the only one who understood the Byzantine mess of legacy code that kept this company breathing, reduced to nothing. Rachel from QA shifted uncomfortably beside me. James from DevOps wouldn't meet my eyes. They knew. Everyone in that room knew the truth that Kyle couldn't write a SQL query if Stack Overflow went down. But they also knew whose last name carried weight, whose uncle signed the paychecks. Any questions? Kyle asked, already closing his laptop. I had 1,000. Why did competence matter less than nepotism? How did 4 months of buzzword bingo qualify him to evaluate 7 years of expertise? What would happen when the next critical bug hit and he couldn't tell a null pointer from a memory leak? But I just smiled. The same polite, professional smile I'd perfected through countless meetings where my ideas became someone else's promotions. No questions, I said, my voice steady as a flatline. Kyle nodded, satisfied. Meeting adjourned. People filed out, some offering sympathetic glances, others already calculating their own survival in this new hierarchy. I stayed seated, fingers still resting on my keyboard, watching Kyle high-five Marcus on their way out. They thought I'd slink away, update my resume, maybe cry in the bathroom like Sarah did when they passed her over for team lead. They thought wrong. As the conference room emptied, I opened my development environment and stared at the Logic Nexus codebase. 20,000 lines of elegant, intricate code that held Veyron's future in its functions and loops. Kyle had just made the biggest mistake of his privileged life. He'd humiliated someone who understood this system better than anyone else in the building. Someone who knew every vulnerability, every dependency, every single point of failure. I wasn't going to destroy anything. I wasn't going to rage or sabotage or leave nasty comments in the code. That was amateur hour. The kind of thing that got you fired and sued. No, I was going to do something much simpler. I was going to let Kyle be Kyle, And when the time came, when he needed the one thing only I could provide, well, we'd see who was nothing then. The beauty of revenge isn't in the explosion, it's in the quiet setup that nobody sees coming. That night, I stayed late in the office, the fluorescent lights humming their familiar tune while the building emptied around me. Kyle had left at 5:30 sharp, probably heading to whatever overpriced bar he'd expensed to the company. I pulled up the Logic Nexus repository, my masterpiece, really. The algorithm that translated Veyron's chaotic data streams into something ironclad Pharma's systems could actually use. Without it, that $57 million contract was just paper with signatures. With it, we could deliver on every promise Kyle had made in meetings where he'd presented my work as team achievements. First, I created a complete backup of the original algorithm, every function, every optimization, every elegant solution I'd crafted over countless nights, encrypted it with military-grade protection, and stored it on my personal drive. Not company property anymore, just my own intellectual creation, carefully preserved. Then came the delicate part. I didn't delete anything, didn't corrupt the files or plant logic bombs. That would be illegal, traceable, stupid. Instead, I simply exercised my rights as the primary contributor. See? 3 years ago, when I first started developing Logic Nexus, I'd been smart enough to file it under our innovation protocol, the one that required explicit authorization from the original developer for production deployment. HR had signed off on it. Legal had approved it. It was all there in the compliance documentation, gathering digital dust because nobody ever read the fine print. I opened our Jira system and found the main ticket for the ironclad deployment. In the comments section, barely noticeable among hundreds of technical notes, I added a single line: check with primary logic owner before production release. Time stamped at 11:43 p.m., properly logged, completely legitimate. The next morning, I submitted my 2 weeks' notice, clean, professional, citing new opportunities for growth. I didn't mention Kyle's name, didn't file any complaints, didn't make waves. HR processed it without question. Developers left all the time, and they probably assumed I'd gotten a better offer elsewhere. Kyle actually seemed pleased when he heard. I caught him smirking in the hallway, probably thinking he'd successfully pushed out someone who might challenge his authority. "Good luck with your future endeavors, Emma," he said, that patronizing tone suggesting he thought I'd be begging for references within a month. "Thanks, Kyle. I'm sure you'll do great things with the ironclad deployment," I replied, matching his fake sincerity with my own. He had no idea what Logic Nexus actually did. To him, it was just another system, another black box that the tech people handled. He'd been in meetings where I'd explained it, but he'd been scrolling through his phone, occasionally nodding and throwing in buzzwords like scalability and synergy. He assumed any competent developer could maintain it. After all, how special could I really be? I was nothing, remember? I spent my last 2 weeks documenting everything except the one thing that mattered: the authorization protocol. Created handover documents that looked comprehensive but carefully omitted that crucial detail. Trained my replacement, a junior developer named Pete, who was smart enough to follow instructions but too new to question gaps in the architecture. When anyone asked about Logic Nexus specifically, I simply said, "It's all in the repository. The documentation is very thorough." On my last day, I cleaned out my desk while Kyle held a team meeting about exciting transitions and fresh perspectives. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I could see him gesturing enthusiastically, probably selling some vision of efficiency he'd copied from a Medium article. Rachel caught my eye and shook her head slightly. She knew what was coming, even if she couldn't quite articulate it. I left my keycard on the desk, sent a farewell email thanking everyone for the wonderful years, and walked out of Veyron Systems at 4:15 p.m. on a Thursday. No dramatic exit, no bridge-burning speech, just a quiet departure that would echo louder than any slam of a door. From my car in the parking lot, I pulled up the Logic Nexus repository on my personal laptop one last time. Everything was still there, pristine and functional, but without my authorization. It was like a Ferrari without keys, beautiful, powerful, and completely useless for the production deployment scheduled in 3 weeks. Kyle would push ahead. Of course, he'd already promised the CEO and the board that the ironclad integration would be seamless. He'd shown them my projections, my timelines, my guarantees, all presented as his strategic vision. He couldn't back down now without admitting he didn't understand the very systems he was supposed to be architecting. I started my car and drove away from Veyron for the last time. My phone already buzzing with messages from a small startup that needed consultation on their system architecture. They couldn't pay much, but they didn't need to. I wasn't doing this for money. I was doing it for the moment when Kyle would realize that nothing had been holding everything together. 3 weeks. That's how long it took for Kyle's hubris to collide with reality. I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop, the one with the exposed brick and overpriced lattes, when my phone lit up with the first distress signal, a Slack notification from Pete, the junior developer who'd inherited my responsibilities. "Emma, sorry to bother you, but did you ever see error 5004 in the Logic Nexus sandbox?" I took a slow sip of my cappuccino before responding, "I'm no longer with Veyron. Pete, you should check with Kyle, he's the VP of Systems Architecture." 5 minutes later, another message, this time from Rachel in QA. "The entire ERP integration is failing. Data mappings are corrupted. Kyle pushed to production an hour ago." I didn't respond to that one. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up the startup's codebase I was consulting for, making a show of being deeply focused on my new work. But I kept my phone face up, watching the disaster unfold in real time through the flood of notifications. By noon, my former colleagues had created a separate Slack channel, one they didn't know I could still access through an old integration. The messages painted a beautiful picture of corporate chaos. API endpoints returning null for all ironclad queries. Rollback failed. Kyle didn't create a restore point. Customer data isn't mapping correctly to their schema. We're bleeding 50K for every hour this is down. Kyle had done exactly what I'd expected. Faced with the deployment deadline, he'd ignored the warning in the Jira ticket, probably hadn't even seen it among the hundreds of other comments. He'd pushed Logic Nexus to production without understanding that the algorithm needed my authorization to initialize properly. Without it, the system was trying to execute with null parameters, creating a cascade of failures that looked random but were entirely predictable. At 2:30 p.m., Kyle called an emergency stand-up. Someone was screencasting it, and I watched from my laptop as he stood at the whiteboard, marker in hand, drawing meaningless diagrams while spouting empty platitudes. "Remember, team failure is just feedback," he announced, his designer shirt showing the first signs of panic sweat. "We need to embrace the agile mindset. Let's iterate our way through this." Pete, bless his honest heart, raised his hand. "Kyle, the Logic Nexus core seems to be locked in some kind of compliance mode. The documentation mentions checking with the primary logic owner." Kyle's smile flickered like a dying light bulb. "We don't need to rely on former employees. We have all the talent we need right here. Marcus, why don't you take a look?" Marcus, the $20,000 bonus recipient, pulled up the code on his screen. I could see him scrolling through it, his expression gradually shifting from confidence to confusion to barely suppressed terror. He was looking at 20,000 lines of intricate logic that might as well have been Sanskrit. "It's complex," Marcus admitted. "Maybe we should focus on solutions, not problems," Kyle interrupted, but his voice had lost its executive timbre. "Everyone, let's break into pods. Pod A will investigate the API failures. Pod B will work on data mapping. Pod C..." He was grasping now, throwing startup jargon at an infrastructure problem like splashing water on an electrical fire. By 4 p.m., the screenshots started coming faster. The ironclad integration wasn't just failing, it was corrupting data in ways that would take weeks to untangle. Every attempt to fix one problem created 2 more, because without understanding the core algorithm, they were essentially performing surgery in the dark. James from DevOps sent me a direct message. "Emma, I know you're not here anymore, but do you have any documentation about the Logic Nexus authorization? We're dying here." I crafted my response carefully. All my documentation was handed over according to protocol. The authorization process should be in the compliance folder. It's a legal requirement, not a technical one. You might want to check with legal about the innovation protocol. Good luck. It wasn't a lie. The documentation was there, filed properly 3 years ago. But finding it would require Kyle to admit he didn't understand the system, to acknowledge that maybe the person he'd called nothing had been protecting something vital. The beautiful irony was that I hadn't sabotaged anything. I'd simply exercised my rights, followed every protocol, documented every requirement. The system was failing because Kyle had ignored the rules, pushed ahead without understanding what he was pushing, assumed that authority could replace expertise. By 6 p.m., I heard from a friend still at Veyron that Kyle had locked himself in his office, making frantic calls. The CEO had been notified. The board was asking questions. Ironclad was threatening to pull the contract if the integration wasn't fixed by Monday. I closed my laptop and ordered another coffee, this time a decaf. I didn't need caffeine to keep me awake. The adrenaline of watching Kyle's world crumble was more than enough. He'd wanted to prove I was nothing. Instead, he was proving that nothing was exactly what happened when you removed the cornerstone and expected the building to stand. The night was young, and the emergency messages were still pouring in, but I had nowhere urgent to be. The startup could wait until tomorrow. Tonight, I was just a former employee, enjoying coffee and watching karma process its own perfect algorithm. Liam Torres had always been the quiet one. In 5 years as architecture team lead, he'd spoken maybe 10 words in meetings where Kyle dominated the conversation. But Liam noticed things, patterns, inconsistencies, the digital breadcrumbs that told stories louder than any PowerPoint presentation. It was Sunday night, 11:15 p.m., when Liam finally found what everyone else had missed. He'd been combing through the repository for 48 hours straight, fueled by energy drinks and the growing certainty that something wasn't accidentally wrong, it was deliberately right. The tag was subtle pending compliance review on the Logic Nexus master branch. Most developers would skip right past it, assuming it was outdated bureaucracy. But Liam had seen Emma work. She didn't leave loose ends. If that tag was there, it meant something. He traced back through the commit history, following the trail of initials EG, Emma Grant's signature on every critical component. Then he found it, buried in a 3-year-old innovation protocol filing. The authorization requirement wasn't some technical hurdle. It was a legal framework Emma had established when she'd first created Logic Nexus. Liam stared at his screen, understanding dawning like a cold sunrise. Emma hadn't broken anything. She'd built in a fail-safe, documented it properly, and followed every rule. Kyle had just been too arrogant to look for the rules in the first place. Monday morning, 8 a.m. sharp, Liam walked past Kyle's office where the VP had apparently spent the night, judging by the pizza boxes and Red Bull cans, and headed straight to legal. Sophie Reed was already at her desk, her expression suggesting she'd been expecting someone like Liam to show up. "I need to see the innovation protocol filings for Logic Nexus," Liam said without preamble. Sophie's fingers flew across her keyboard. Emma Grant's work, right? She was meticulous about IP protection. Smart woman. She pulled up the documents, her professional poker face cracking slightly as she read. Oh no. What? According to this, Logic Nexus is Emma's intellectual property, licensed to Veyron under specific conditions. One of those conditions is that any production deployment requires her explicit written authorization. Sophie looked up at Liam, her face pale. Without that authorization, we're in breach of our own compliance protocols. If this goes to production without her sign-off— It already went to production, Liam said quietly. Thursday afternoon. Kyle pushed it himself. Sophie's coffee mug stopped halfway to her lips. Then we're not just in breach of internal protocol. We're potentially violating the IP provisions of the Ironclad contract. They have a clause about third-party intellectual property. If they find out we deployed unlicensed code— $57 million, Liam finished. Sophie was already reaching for her phone. I need to call the CFO, Now. Within an hour, the executive floor was in full crisis mode. The chief legal officer had arrived, followed by 2 external lawyers who specialized in intellectual property. The CFO was pacing his office, calculating potential losses. The CEO, Kyle's uncle, had cut short his golf vacation and was en route from the airport. Kyle, meanwhile, was still in the conference room, running his 4th emergency innovation session with increasingly desperate energy. He'd drawn up a new organizational chart on the whiteboard, as if restructuring the team would somehow fix the code that was hemorrhaging money with every passing minute. "We need to think outside the box," Kyle was saying when Liam walked in. "Maybe we're approaching this from the wrong angle. Marcus, what if we—" "Kyle," Liam interrupted, his quiet voice cutting through the noise. "We need to talk, privately." Kyle's jaw tightened. "We're in the middle of a crisis. Liam, whatever it is can wait." "No," Liam said, holding up his phone with Sophie's email displayed. "It can't." The subject line was visible to everyone. Urgent IP compliance violation. Potential contract breach. The room went silent. Marcus slowly closed his laptop. Pete started backing toward the door. Rachel was already pulling up LinkedIn on her phone. Kyle followed Liam into the hallway, his confidence finally cracking. "What the hell is this about?" "Emma owns Logic Nexus," Liam said simply. "Legally, we can't use it without her authorization. You pushed it to production without that authorization. We're in violation of our contract with Ironclad." Kyle's face cycled through emotions like a slot machine confusion, anger, fear, and finally, desperation. That's impossible. She was an employee. Everything she built belongs to the company. Not according to the innovation protocol she filed 3 years ago. The one legal approved. The one that's been sitting in our compliance system this entire time. Liam pulled up the JIRA ticket on his phone. "She even warned us. Right here. Check with primary logic owner before production release. You pushed past it." Kyle stared at the screen, his throat working like he was trying to swallow glass. "But she's nothing. I said—" "Yeah," Liam said quietly. "We all heard what you said. Turns out nothing holds the keys to $57 million. Through the glass wall, they could see the legal team gathering in the CEO's office. Sophie was presenting documents on the screen, her laser pointer highlighting specific clauses. The CEO's face was darkening with every slide. Kyle's phone buzzed. A text from his uncle. "My office? Now?" As Kyle walked toward what was certainly the end of his 4-month career at Veyron, Liam pulled out his phone and typed a message to an old colleague who'd left the company recently. "You were right to document everything. They're finally understanding what nothing means." He didn't send it to Emma directly. He knew she'd hear about it soon enough. The tech world was small, and news of Kyle's spectacular failure was already spreading through back channels and whisper networks. The compliance violation wasn't just a technical problem anymore. It was a legal nightmare, a financial disaster, and a very public lesson in what happens when arrogance meets architecture. Tuesday, 9 a.m. Kyle stood at the center of the main floor, every screen in the office displaying the same presentation, Project Phoenix rising from challenge to triumph. He'd spent all night crafting it, desperate to reclaim control of the narrative before the board meeting that afternoon. "Innovation isn't about avoiding failure," Kyle announced to the assembled staff. His voice projected through the wireless mic he'd insisted on using. "It's about transforming setbacks into comebacks. What we're experiencing isn't a crisis. It's an opportunity to demonstrate our resilience and agility." Behind him, a 60-inch LED screen cycled through slides filled with stock photos of eagles soaring and mountains being climbed. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that while Kyle performed his motivational theater, the actual systems were still burning in the background. Rachel leaned over to Pete and whispered, "Is he seriously doing a TED Talk right now?" "Today," Kyle continued, clicking to a slide titled, "Velocity Through Adversity. We're not just fixing a system, we're revolutionizing our entire approach to deployment. We're disrupting our own disruption." From the back of the room, Liam watched Kyle's performance with a mixture of fascination and horror. The man was drowning, but instead of swimming, he was giving a speech about the innovative properties of water. Meanwhile, Liam's phone buzzed with increasingly urgent messages from the legal team. The ironclad representatives had formally requested a compliance audit. They'd specifically asked about the authorization protocols for third-party IP. "Let me share something with you all," Kyle said, his voice taking on what he probably thought was a vulnerable tone. "When I first joined Veyron 4 months ago, I saw potential. Not in the systems anyone can see that, but in the people, in you." Marcus, still loyally sitting in the front row, nodded enthusiastically. Everyone else was checking their phones, watching the back-end errors multiply in real time. The QA dashboard looked like a Christmas tree, if Christmas trees were on fire and screaming. "So I'm announcing Project Phoenix," Kyle declared, clicking to reveal a complex flowchart that meant absolutely nothing. "We're going to rebuild, reimagine, and reintegrate. We're not just going to meet the ironclad deadline, we're going to exceed it." That's when the conference room door opened. The CEO walked in, followed by the entire board of directors. They didn't take seats. They stood along the back wall like a funeral procession that had taken a wrong turn. Kyle's smile flickered but held. "Perfect timing. I was just sharing our recovery strategy with the team." "Kyle," his uncle said, voice flat as old beer, "we need to discuss the email we just received." "Email?" Kyle's hand moved unconsciously to his phone. The CFO stepped forward, tablet in hand. "From Ironclad's legal department. They're invoking the audit clause. They want to see all documentation for Logic Nexus, including," he paused, reading directly, "proof of proper authorization from all intellectual property holders." The room was so quiet you could hear the servers failing 3 floors down. That's just a formality," Kyle stammered. "We have all the documentation. Our systems are fully compliant with—" "Are they—" The CEO's voice cut through Kyle's bluster like a scalpel. "Because legal tells me Logic Nexus requires authorization from Emma Grant, the employee you called nothing 5 weeks ago, the one who left the day you pushed unauthorized code to production." Every head in the room turned toward Kyle. His wireless mic picked up his sudden, sharp intake of breath, amplifying it through the speakers. Liam stood up, tablet in hand. "I've compiled the timeline," he said, his quiet voice carrying more authority than Kyle's mic ever could. He connected to the main screen, replacing Kyle's meaningless flowchart with hard data. Thursday, 2:43 p.m., Kyle initiates production deployment. 2:44 p.m., system warnings about compliance check ignored. 3:15 p.m., first errors appear. 3:47 p.m., cascade failure begins. Current status, $800,000 in penalties and counting. Potential contract termination within 48 hours if compliance isn't restored. The slide changed to show a single JIRA comment. "Check with primary logic owner before production release." This warning, Liam continued, was posted by Emma Grant 2 weeks before she left. It was visible to anyone who bothered to look. Kyle's mic started feedbacking, a high-pitched whine that seemed appropriate for the moment. He fumbled to turn it off, his hands shaking. "I need all department heads in conference room A," the CEO announced. "Now, Kyle, you too." As the executives filed out, the main floor erupted in barely suppressed chaos. Everyone had seen it, the complete implosion of Kyle's 4-month reign, broadcast in high definition with surround sound. Sophie from legal appeared at Liam's shoulder. "The board's going to ask about Emma, where she is, what it would take to get her authorization." "Good luck with that," Rachel interjected, pulling up her LinkedIn. "Look at her status update from yesterday." On the screen, Emma's profile showed a simple post, "Enjoying my consulting work with innovative startups." Sometimes smaller companies understand that true value isn't about titles or org charts, it's about knowing which keys open which doors. Below it, the comments were already filling up with recruiters and CTOs from Fortune 500 companies. all suddenly very interested in someone who could architect $57 million systems. Kyle's Project Phoenix presentation still glowed on the abandoned screen, the eagle frozen mid-soar. But everyone in the room knew the real Phoenix wasn't going to be the project. It was going to be Emma's career, rising from the ashes of Kyle's arrogance. The revolution Kyle had promised was happening, just not the way he'd planned. I didn't answer the first call, or the second, or the fifth. By Wednesday afternoon, my phone had become a symphony of desperation calls from Veyron numbers I recognized, texts from former colleagues, LinkedIn messages from people who'd never acknowledged my existence when I worked there. I let them all go to voicemail while I sat in my home office, reviewing code for the startup that actually valued my expertise. The first voicemail was from Sophie in legal, professional but strained. Emma, we need to discuss the Logic Nexus authorization. Please call back at your earliest convenience. The 10th was from the CFO himself. Ms. Grant, we're prepared to discuss compensation for your consultation on this matter. Please contact us immediately. The 20th, at 8:45 p.m., was from someone I hadn't expected, the CEO. Kyle's uncle, David Donovan himself. Emma, this is David. I think we need to have an honest conversation about your contributions to Veyron. I'd like to personally apologize for any misunderstandings. Misunderstandings, that's what they were calling it now. My lawyer, yes. I'd hired one the day after leaving Veyron. Because I'm not stupid, sat across from me at my dining table, reading through the formal request that had just arrived by courier. They're offering you a consulting fee of $50,000 to provide the authorization, she said, amused. One signature, $50,000. What else? That's it. They seem to think this is a simple transaction. She set down the paper. They have no idea you hold all the cards. Do they? I pulled up the ironclad contract on my laptop. I still had access to it through a shared drive someone had forgotten to revoke. Section 47B, the part about third-party intellectual property. If Veyron couldn't prove proper authorization within 72 hours of a formal audit request, Ironclad could terminate with full penalties. $57 million would evaporate, along with Veyron's reputation. Send them a counter, I said. I'll provide authorization, but not as a consultant. Thursday morning, 10 a.m. The Veyron boardroom had never felt smaller. Despite being the largest room in the building, David Donovan sat at the head of the table, flanked by legal, the CFO, and 3 board members who'd flown in overnight. Kyle sat at the far end, no longer the confident VP, but a pale shadow in a wrinkled designer shirt. I walked in wearing the same outfit I'd worn to my last review, the one where Kyle had called me nothing, professional, understated, forgettable, except this time, everyone was looking at me. Emma, David started, his CEO voice trying to project warmth. Thank you for coming. We appreciate. Let's skip the pleasantries, I interrupted, setting my laptop on the table. You have 48 hours before Ironclad pulls the contract. You need my authorization. I have terms. The CFO leaned forward. We've prepared a generous consulting. I don't want a consulting fee. I pulled up my prepared document. I want Kyle's position. The room went silent. Kyle's head snapped up, his mouth opening in protest. That's, David started, then stopped. He knew they had no leverage. Vice President of Systems Architecture, I continued. The $57 million contract he was overseeing, the position he used to determine I was nothing. I looked directly at Kyle for the first time. I want all of it. This is extortion, Kyle blurted out, finding his voice. She sabotaged. I did nothing illegal. I cut him off. I protected my intellectual property according to protocols your uncle's company approved. You ignored compliance warnings and deployed code you didn't understand. That's not sabotage. Kyle, that's incompetence. My lawyer slid a folder across the table. Ms. Grant's terms are simple. Full position. Retroactive compensation for the past 2 years of underpayment based on market rates for architects of her caliber, and a public acknowledgement of her role in developing Logic Nexus. Or, David asked, though he already knew. Or you can explain to Ironclad why you deployed unlicensed code. You can watch 57 million disappear. You can deal with the lawsuit I'll file for attempting to use my IP without authorization. I closed my laptop. You have 1 hour to decide. I walked out, leaving them in that boardroom with their choices laid bare. Kyle's voice drifted through the closing door, high and desperate. Uncle David, you can't seriously... 45 minutes later, my phone rang. David Donovan, personally. We accept your terms, he said, each word sounding like it was being pulled from his throat with pliers. Kyle has been reassigned to our Cincinnati office, business development. The position is yours, effective immediately. And the announcement will go out this afternoon. Full credit for Logic Nexus, recognition of your architecture work, the entire narrative. Send the contracts to my lawyer, I said. Once they're signed, you'll have your authorization. 3 hours later, I walked back into Varen Systems as Vice President of Systems Architecture. The same security guard who'd taken my badge 2 weeks ago handed me a new one, executive level, corner office access. Kyle was cleaning out his office when I passed. He looked up, his face a masterpiece of barely contained rage and humiliation. You planned this, he said quietly. No, Kyle, I replied, stopping in the doorway. You planned this. Every time you dismissed my expertise, every time you took credit for my work, every time you confused nepotism with competence. I smiled, the same polite smile I'd worn in that review meeting. I just made sure the plan included consequences. The authorization went through at 4:15 p.m. Logic Nexus hummed back to life. The ironclad integration proceeded flawlessly, and $57 million remained secure. But everyone knew the real price had been much higher. It had cost them Kyle's ego, David's nephew, and the illusion that nothing couldn't bring everything crashing down. The ironclad contract closed at 9 a.m. Friday morning, $57 million, secured. The integration ran flawlessly, every data point mapping correctly, every API call returning exactly what it should. Logic Nexus purred like a well-tuned engine, which is what happens when the person who built it is actually the one overseeing it. I sat in my new corner office, Kyle's former office, watching the Manhattan skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows, the same view he'd had while deciding I was nothing. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I didn't gloat. I had work to do. Emma. Rachel knocked on the doorframe. The team's ready for the all-hands. The main floor was packed. Everyone who'd witnessed Kyle's Project Phoenix disaster 3 days ago was here, waiting to see what came next. I didn't have a wireless mic, didn't need one. I'm not here to give speeches about disruption or transformation, I began, my voice carrying without amplification. I'm here to fix what's broken and build what works. Logic Nexus is stable. The ironclad contract is secure. That's what matters. No PowerPoints, no eagles, no mountain metaphors, just truth. Effective immediately. We're implementing actual code review protocols, not the rubber stamp approvals Kyle was running, but real technical evaluation. If you don't understand what you're deploying, you don't deploy it, period. Heads nodded around the room. These were good engineers who'd been forced to play corporate theater for 4 months. Also, I continued, the bonus structure is under review. Performance will be measured by actual contributions, not proximity to leadership. The spreadsheet will be transparent. Everyone will know exactly why they're being compensated. Marcus, Kyle's $20,000 friend, had already resigned. He'd sent his notice at 6 a.m., probably realizing his meal ticket had been punched. After the meeting, Liam approached me privately. Kyle cleared out his office yesterday, but he left something behind. He handed me a leather portfolio, the kind executives carry to look important. Inside was Kyle's original presentation for the board, the one where he'd pitched himself for the VP position. I flipped through it, almost admiring the audacity. He'd used my work, my diagrams, my projections, everything presented as strategic vision under new leadership. The last slide made me pause. It was a photo from the company retreat 6 months ago. The entire engineering team, including me, standing in front of the Veyron logo. Kyle had drawn a circle around himself in red marker and written, Future VP, the rest equals supporting cast. I'd been crossed out entirely with a black X. Burn it, Liam suggested. No, I said, placing it in my desk drawer. I'm keeping it. Sometimes you need reminders of what happens when you mistake arrogance for ability. That afternoon, David Donovan called me to his office. The CEO looked older than he had a week ago. Stress etched in lines around his eyes. Emma, he began, then stopped, choosing his words carefully. I owe you an apology. Not a corporate one, a real one. I waited. Kyle is my sister's son. She asked me to give him a chance, to set him up for success. He laughed bitterly. I gave him a title he didn't earn and let him diminish people who'd built this company. You especially. Why did you let it happen? Because I confused family loyalty with leadership, because I thought technical skills could be learned on the job if you had enough confidence. He met my eyes. Because I didn't understand that calling someone nothing in a room full of their peers isn't confidence, it's cruelty. And now Kyle's in Cincinnati, doing market research for products he'll never understand. His mother hasn't spoken to me in 3 days, and I have a VP who actually knows what she's doing. He stood, extending his hand. The job should have been yours from the start. I shook his hand, professional and brief. Yes, it should have. The Cincinnati detail was perfect. Kyle had been relegated to a satellite office, the corporate equivalent of exile. From VP of a $57 million system to PowerPoints about market penetration in the Midwest. The only thing he'd be architecting now was his own irrelevance. That evening, I got a single text from an unknown number, You destroyed my life. Kyle, I could have ignored it, blocked the number, moved on. Instead, I replied, No, you destroyed your life. I just documented it properly. He didn't respond. 2 hours later, his LinkedIn showed a new position, Business Development Associate, Veyron Systems Cincinnati office, the same title given to fresh college graduates. Pete knocked on my door at 5:30 p.m. Emma, quick question about the Logic Nexus documentation. Send it to my email, I said, packing up my laptop. I'll review it over the weekend. And Pete, good catch on that compliance warning during the crisis. You've got sharp instincts. He beamed, the kind of genuine appreciation Kyle had never shown anyone. As I walked through the office, past developers who nodded with actual respect, rather than forced deference, I realized something. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoration, putting competence back where it belonged, letting talent speak louder than nepotism. The security guard smiled as I badged out. Have a good weekend, Ms. Grant. You too, William. Kyle had never learned his name. Small details like that, they're what separate something from nothing. The $57 million was secure. The position was mine. And somewhere in Cincinnati, a former VP was learning what it actually felt like to be nothing in a corporate hierarchy. The math was perfect. He'd called me nothing and lost everything. I'd said nothing and gained it all. Karma, compiled and executed flawlessly. 6 months later, I stood in the same conference room C where it all began. The broken AC had been fixed, one of the first things I'd authorized as VP. No more sweat-soaked presentations. No more suffering in silence. Sometimes the smallest changes speak the loudest. The quarterly review was wrapping up. Pete had just presented his optimization of the Logic Nexus extensions, a brilliant piece of engineering that would save us $3 million annually. Rachel's QA team had reduced errors by 80% with the new protocols. Liam's architecture roadmap was ambitious but achievable. Excellent work, everyone, I said, meaning it. Pete, your optimization is getting fast-tracked to production. Rachel, I'm approving your request for 2 additional QA engineers. Liam, let's discuss the microservices migration next week. No humiliation, no power plays, no nothing comments, just professionals doing professional work. As the team filed out, chatting about lunch plans and weekend projects. Sophie from legal stopped by. Thought you might want to know Kyle's LinkedIn updated again. I rarely thought about Kyle anymore, but curiosity flickered. Oh, he's left Veyron, starting his own consulting firm, Donovan Strategic Solutions. I almost laughed. Kyle, consulting on strategies for systems he never understood. But the laughter died in my throat. It wasn't funny anymore, just sad. He'd learned nothing from his fall, still believing titles and confidence could replace competence. Good for him, I said, and meant it. Everyone deserves second chances, even if they waste them. That evening, I was working late by choice this time. Not desperation when David Donovan appeared in my doorway. He'd made a habit of these informal check-ins, part mentorship, part penance. The board's impressed, he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. The ironclad expansion just got approved. They want Logic Nexus powering their entire East Coast operation. That's a $100 million contract. 120, he corrected, and they specifically requested you as the lead architect. Seems word got out about who really built this system. I leaned back, looking at the city lights beginning to twinkle beyond the windows. 6 months ago, I'd been nothing in this very building. Now I was architecting deals that would define Veyron's next decade. There's something else, David continued. Kyle called me last week, wanted a reference for his new venture. Did you give him one? I told him the truth, that he's creative, ambitious, and has potential. Also that he needs to learn the difference between leadership and leverage, between confidence and competence. David stood to leave. He hung up on me. Later that night, alone in my office with only the glow of multiple monitors for company, I pulled out Kyle's old portfolio from my desk drawer, that photo from the company retreat, with him circled in red and me crossed out in black. I didn't feel anger anymore, didn't feel vindication, just a quiet understanding that some people build their worth by diminishing others, while others build worth by creating value. Kyle had tried the former. I'd chosen the latter. I fed the portfolio into the shredder, watching his delusions of grandeur turn into confetti. Then I pulled up Logic Nexus on my screen, my creation, my masterpiece, now protecting hundreds of millions in contracts. The code was beautiful in its complexity, elegant in its efficiency. 20,000 lines that Kyle had tried to deploy without understanding a single function. He'd seen it as a black box to be conquered. I saw it as a symphony to be conducted. My phone buzzed, a LinkedIn notification, another Fortune 500 CTO wanting to discuss opportunities, offering packages that would triple even my VP salary. I archived it without responding. I wasn't finished at Veyron. There were still systems to build, teams to mentor, value to create. The company that had once let Kyle call me nothing was now trusting me with everything. The irony was perfect. Kyle had given me the greatest gift possible. By trying to erase me, he'd made me impossible to ignore. By calling me nothing, he'd forced me to prove I was everything this company needed. I shut down my computer at 11:45 p.m., gathering my things in the quiet office. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new systems, new possibilities, but tonight I'd allow myself one small moment of satisfaction. Kyle thought he'd buried me in that meeting. Instead, he'd planted a seed, and from nothing, everything had grown. The security guard nodded as I left. Another late night, Ms. Grant. The last one for a while. William, time to focus on building rather than fixing. Outside, Manhattan hummed with its endless energy. Somewhere in Cincinnati, Kyle was probably crafting another PowerPoint about disruption. Here in New York, I was actually doing it. No speeches, no wireless mics, no borrowed glory. Just competence, quietly winning over confidence. Just nothing, running everything. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment, and let's connect. If this tale of corporate karma resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts below. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a similar workplace revenge? Let me know your story in the comments.